Welcome to CMMS Radio, a podcast and general resource for all things CMMS, computerized maintenance management software, from selection to implementation to help you make better choices and have a successful CMMS journey. We'll bring in experts along the way to help us learn more about CMMS, facilities operations, and much more. If you need help with the CMMS project, send a message at CMMSradio.com using the What's on Your Mind link. Suggest a topic, share your CMMS story, or ask questions. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Today, we are joined once again by George Williams with ReliabilityX. Now, the reason I wanted to have George on again, and George, thanks for making the time. I know you're very busy, but I noticed this course that you have coming up, and I know you've got it up behind you. It's part of the interdisciplinary professional program, and that's in the School of Engineering at the University of Wisconsin, where you are offering and teaching a course for, and it says behind you, CMMS setup and utilization. And the reason I wanted to explore this a little bit is, first of all, I think it's a very necessary component of what people go through in their training. They need exposure to these things. They need good strategies. They need to know where to start. And I've reviewed a lot of what the course has, but I wanted to just talk to you about it with no notes, and just say, when we talk about things like, in the plant, not having the parts, the different bottlenecks and disruptions that can happen across resources, including our human resources, right? Frontline workers are really out there getting it done. But this course seems to me a phenomenal place for somebody to start if they're a maintenance management professional of any type, to just get their bearings instead of going by what they really think they might know or what some vendor is going to tell them. Am I getting that right? Why this course exists?
This course exists because there's a dire need for it. And I'll be honest with you, this course was added a couple of years ago to the University of Wisconsin's Maintenance and Reliability Certificate program at my request. They were looking to expand this certificate program with a couple of additional courses. And I said, look, this is necessary. And quite honestly, it doesn't quite get the attendance I would love it to get, because it is incredibly necessary. I think people get put off by it for two reasons. One, they either feel like, well, I got what I got and I'm where I'm at. I'm not going to impact the design of the system we picked or the system that they picked. And two, there's a lot of other courses that may be more direct in terms of what they are, right? Like the course that's accompanied by this in the same week is root cause failure analysis. So if I'm at the plant and I've got a choice of taking one of those two, one of them is like the baseline work that, takes a long time to put in properly, and it will have great benefits, but it ain't having them tomorrow. And root cause analysis has them tomorrow. So this course competes against those other courses and doesn't always get the attendance that I think it deserves. It is a phenomenal course and one of my favorite courses to teach. It is an interactive course. It's very much so discussions around how systems are configured, even to the point of, like, if you're new to CMMS or new to even using a database, the course is designed to give you an understanding of what the difference is between a field and a table and related tables, and the difference between the table identifier and name versus what you see on the screen in the user interface. It gives you a good understanding of how that is structured for most CMMS systems, because they're not all relational table based anymore. But for the most part, it covers those basics. Very briefly, we discussed non-SQL databases and flat file stuff and all that, but not dramatically. It then goes into an awful lot around what the various, what I call core records versus transactional records. And so it covers the basics around an inventory item, which is a core data record, and the issue of inventory, which is a transactional record. or assets versus work orders. And, some of these are core records, some of these are transactional records. And we talk very much around the difference between those. And for each of those types, we talk about standardizations and data, best practices. So it covers, it covers all of that soup to nuts. And that's just day one. Day two focuses on the project of selection and implementation and training for a CMMS system. And so even if you're on the IT side of things and would be slightly bored hearing the table relationship side, at least you'll understand why those transactional records exist from a business process perspective. And then on day two, we cover the actual IT project itself, including the business input and the IT input with respect to selection and implementation.
I have a question about that very specifically. So recently, I've had a lot of different discussions. I was out at Reliable Plant in Orlando, picked up a lot of sound bites, a couple of nice little interviews, and just being around maintenance professionals, much like yourself. In fact, I met up with Joe there. We just didn't get to record. Joe Anderson, everyone I'm talking about. He's also with ReliabilityX. And when you talk about IT and you bring that up, I think sometimes what happens at organizations, regardless of the CMMS that you get, there might be some things overlooked when that happens as to the why for the entire organization. But then when we talk about business units, do you see commonality, like a high frequency of IT professionals within organizations? This kind of gets dumped on them, and then they have huge blind spots to the why behind why it's there, because it seems like that's what you were just talking about, why this matters to the org. Yeah.
Yes. So I feel bad sometimes on the IT side, and through no fault of their own, oftentimes they are responsible for this system and they should not be. Let me say that as loud as I possibly can. IT should not own the CMMS system or any business software system when it comes to representing the business process side of things. That's fine if you're an on-premise installation, then great. IT owns the servers and they own all that other stuff. But deciding how the system gets configured should not fall on IT's laps. It's unfair for them to have to make those decisions with no understanding of the business process. And so it's not necessarily their fault if it's not configured appropriately. You put somebody responsible for that that's not an expert in your field. And then on the business side, we just blame IT because, it's not doing what I need it to do. And quite frankly, they've got other systems to support, which are more critical to the business in their mind, like the ERP. And so there's lots of stuff that happens outside of that. The business should own the system. Even if it's a SaaS solution, there are configurable entities inside a SaaS solution. It's not just, some people liken a SaaS solution to, I bought the disk, right? I don't get to change the disk. I'm installing it. It's not exactly like that. You still need requirements and what configurations may exist have to be developed. But yeah, I think IT often gets the brunt of a poor implementation when it's a business solution. IT is a support function. They're a support function.
Right.
They're designed to help you select the right system and get it installed or, get it licensed appropriately for your size of organization. I think it is unfair for senior leadership to expect IT to be the expert in business process and own those systems on the business side.
Absolutely. I agree with that because we've all seen it a lot. Anybody that's been in industry, even for a short period of time, whether you work at a CMMS company, you're a technician, you're a chief building engineer, you're a CMRP that's heavily involved in the management and orchestration of these things, you're going to see, IT is going to have some kind of a touch. But when we do our deployments and our rollouts, especially on the selection portion of identifying and picking a solution, you want your frontline workforce, you want your people that are the true maintenance of how the true experts of how the maintenance operation really works within the org handling it. IT needs to be involved, but they do get kind of, hey, here's something that's dumped on your lap and it gets them stuck. So getting back to the cores, when we talk about CMMS setup and utilization, I know one of the things I would expect when you're teaching how to look for these solutions is first to look at your existing process or processes. So is there a lot of that in the course where you're really setting up the context for them to kind
Oh
of
yeah.
develop their own perspective?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, we focus heavily not only on the fact that a requirements document should exist, like what do I expect from the CMMS, but how to actually word it. Because there's a big difference between a requirement that says the system will lock you out after 3 unsuccessful logins versus the system will log you out after 3 consecutive unsuccessful logins. Because IT can solution it, depending on the system, you may get configuration and 6 months, 8 years could go by between your first, second, and third unsuccessful login, and then suddenly
Right.
you're locked out, right? So just how you word requirements so that a developer or a programmer or the person who's going to configure the system, that makes a difference. The IT language is not the same as the business language, and trying to understand that, oftentimes that gap is what causes folks to be unhappy with the solution. Both IT and the business hopefully worked on it, but just the language barrier between those two groups and entities and what they mean by something can make a difference in whether or not the system is configured appropriately or not. In my career, I was very lucky at one of my previous companies where I was the business owner of their solution. We had an IT person who was responsible for back end data pulling and report writing and some other stuff. And once the system was mature, they were going to let this individual go. And I hired him on the business side. And that was one of the best moves I've ever made. That, like, getting him an understanding of the business and then us being able to talk and then communicate back to IT, like it was invaluable. So yeah, this course would be very, very beneficial for the folks on the IT side to come and get a better understanding. Even just from, some folks on the IT side, they're pressured. They're under a lot of pressure to reduce the number of systems they support because, the IT organization's like a, room full of rabbits. It just kind of grows because the systems get more complicated. You've got more licensing structures and SaaS solutions, and now all the cybersecurity stuff. And so what used to be, a guy who ran around and plugged in PCs and gave you a keyboard and a mouse is now this entire organization inside the company through no fault of their own, but it seems like they just keep growing, right?
Yeah.
Because the necessity is there. Things are much more high tech and they all have to communicate. Not only is the world flat, but now all the machines are flat too, right? Like they're all communicating to each other. And
Right.
so, that organization is growing and under a lot of pressure to keep the number of systems down. And they often make recommendations that are very detrimental to the business. Like, well, the ERP happens to have a work order module, so just use that, right? And the business doesn't know how to combat that. And so in this course, we also cover how to understand the value proposition of a CMMS system and communicate that to leadership.
Now, this particular class, the one we're talking about, is coming up in October. It's going to be on October 2nd and 3rd.
Yep.
And you can do that in Madison, Wisconsin, and you can also do it live online. So what I wanted to ask you, George, is when it comes to the types of attendees that are, part of the course, they're obviously typically going to be maintenance professionals. You got maintenance managers, and pretty much the gamut of anybody that's on a team. Are they typically participating in this highly interactive way where they're giving you scenarios? I suspect that they all bring a lot of kind of horror stories when it comes to CMMS, and like they
Yes.
talk about why they don't like it, why they do, they wish it worked. Is that some of the stuff that gets covered, like strategies for how to get through it if your company says, hey, it is what it is, use it?
We have lots of debates. We have a lot of good debate worthy discussion around best practices, particularly on the data setup side. Things like emergency is not a work order type, and and use of smart number systems versus just using the auto number for records. And so we get in oftentimes people have very rigid opinions around those things, as do I. And so we debate those things. And then they have to break off and work in groups. And so, for example, just some basic stuff. We'll say, hey, you got a large record collection or music collection, and we want to create a database to categorize all that stuff. What are some of the fields that should be lookup fields, where it's looking up a relationship table? What are some of the fields that should be static data? Like, and how do you determine that type of stuff, so that they get a good understanding of what those relationships are for, in like why when I go to, the inventory application is the item in one table and the vendor list is another table. And, like they don't always understand how that stuff is interrelated. And so we even get down to the basics of understanding those types of things, because it's actually really important. So a lot of the folks that are coming there are the admins, and they're also charged with, in some cases, using things like Power BI to pull information out. And they don't quite understand what a schema is inside the database and how those things are related. So they leave with a much better understanding of where to find the information and how to pull it out.
I like that you're teaching in this course the almost like what's behind the decision making and why what you're doing here, and here within the platform, picking the platform, setting it up, the naming conventions and all that, and how that's going to inform this actual business intelligence that is kind of the ultimate goal when it comes to this, digitization of everything that we do. And so if our CMMS is the accounting system for maintenance, right? If it didn't get written down, it didn't happen. Now that's all fine and good. We understand that. That's great. But what does that really mean for the organization? So tying that together for those administrators, they know why they're clicking this, and they know why they've got 2 extra clicks over here, and they may or may not like it. But if they know why, now they've learned something that allows them to get on board and help contribute to moving an organization forward. Is that fair kind of summary of that part?
Just a little bit? And those things are incredibly critical, even just during the training process. Let's say you want to tech, the people on the shop floor to fill out a specific field as part of the work order. They're not going to do it just because you told them to do it. They have to understand the value proposition and what you get back. And what's interesting about this course is oftentimes the questions I get are, well, my system doesn't do that. And sometimes that just blows my mind, because, these systems, while they vary greatly in their functional capability, the base of what they do is pretty much the same. And what we'll find out is, as we kind of dig into that person's comment, that, well, they decided to use that field for something else. And so they can't actually take advantage of that functionality. And we run across that an awful lot in real life when we're doing consulting work, and we find that out as part of this class. And people get very frustrated at how their system was delivered to them, because they had some help and somebody gave them poor guidance. And so this class should also be for all of my competitors that help people put a system in, because if you don't understand what the system inherently is designed to do and what its designed intent is, you're giving bad advice. You're just giving people terrible advice that somebody else has to come clean up, or they're stuck living with for a really long time. So I would even encourage all of my competitors that install solutions like this for a living and make good money doing it, to come to this class to get a much deeper understanding of what that means.
Yeah. And the nice thing about that, and I'm mentioning Reliable Plant again, only because what I saw, what I experienced, all the great people that I met. So these types of individuals, if they're in this class, they're going to understand a lot of it already, but they're going to get more nuanced insights, and that can improve the way they consult in the future. But this is the thing about this overall maintenance community, how everybody really just wants to do great work. And when organizations and teams and a person and I'm going to throw everybody under the bus. We get in situations where we got to keep moving. We make some exceptions, or maybe we didn't even know that we didn't know something. And that happens a lot. Vendors, you've got account executives and these different individuals engaging with people. And I think that's great if you can help somebody kind of qualify your solution for the problem that they're trying to solve. But I say to people, don't be afraid to leverage or engage a consultant that can just help you do a little triple check, because you might miss something that actually produces the reliability we're after. And this class can help with that overall.
1,000%, 1,000%. And yes, you should definitely have some guidance on the business side of things, because while the software vendor or a company that does the design and implementation of the software, the integrator, may have people that they call experts in this space, oftentimes they fall short of really understanding that business process, and they simply capture the one that you have. And that may actually not be appropriate for the system that you've selected. And, you need to design the system around your business process that works at the plant. And through no fault of their own, they're not, the integration companies are IT companies at heart, and then they have some facilitators. And oftentimes we find that they fall a little short of giving great advice. And that's certainly not all inclusive. And I'm not trying to offend people that work in that space that do a phenomenal job of it. But my history shows that there's an awful lot of places we go that got really poor advice and don't use the system as designed, intended, and struggle. Or they just don't even understand functionality. Like a basic example, like most systems that are, we'll say, below the top tier, they use these asset template records. And so they'll say, well, you can create a template record for a motor and a template record for a pump. This way you don't have to start from scratch. You just copy the template over and you fill out the data. What those companies don't necessarily explain is that that now allows you to create things like attribute values and custom fields on a template that wouldn't exist anywhere else. Like you would never see the field frame size on any other record except the motor. And when you create those templates, you can just add frame size as a field, and it won't exist anywhere else, but it will exist on every motor. And that allows a planner to then, with frame size and horsepower and all those factors, they can then look up spare parts and replacements either in your inventory or out at your vendors that match without it having to be make and model. And those things can happen across even location records. I want to know my ceiling tile grid size and the paint color and the outlet cover colors. Those things sit on templates in some of those systems. But oftentimes people think, well, I don't really need to do that because all it does is it tells me it's a motor. And then there's no other value there because I'm copying, I'm going to make all these templates. And the only thing it's saving me is the equipment type. And that's not entirely true. So a lot of the other things that this class covers is the functional capabilities of systems at different tiers and what the difference is. What's the difference between a system that can do multiple currencies? Do you need multiple currencies? Because if you do, you're dropping about 90% of these systems off off your option list. Do you need it to handle calibrations? And if so, does it need to stick down to significant digits on the calibration? If so, you've knocked 99% of the systems off your list, right? So there's a lot of nuances to your requirements and what that does to the list of vendors that you should go look at. And there are just hundreds and hundreds of vendors that you can look at. None of them more or less suitable for everyone, right? Like your requirements dictate which ones are good matches, and your budget dictates which ones are good matches. Right. So, I think that what I try to do is be as agnostic as possible in the teaching, and try to give people a flavor for what these systems can and can't do, and the best way to get their requirements to match design intent so that they can get the most out of the system.
I'm really excited about it, and it's really why I reached out to you, and it was on short notice. I said, "Oh, we got to talk about this course because I think there should be more of this happening because the benefit to the overall outcome of what an organization can really do with a computerized maintenance management system." And the one last thing I wanted to ask you about, just being mindful of time today, is there anything in the course that helps with mitigation strategies on user adoption or how to approach the actual deployment and adoption step when it comes to CMMS?
Yeah, we cover the entire project plan. So everything through training, go live, and post go live support is covered there. And yes, we absolutely talk about user adopt. The whole thing is set up and utilization, right? If you're not going to use the system, then it becomes it's just a filing cabinet. If you're using it incorrectly, you've bought a very expensive filing cabinet. And so we cover those topics. We cover, user adoption and why clicks matter. I don't know. I think we might have talked about this. My first week, I took a job in like 2016 at a company, or 15, I forget when it was, at a company, and I was instantly given, okay, you're the SAP business owner. And the very first week I started there, they had a meeting with IT and a representative from the software company to go over whether or not that system could handle calibration, because they were using Blue Mountain. And again, IT wanted them to whittle down to one system. So I'm sitting in this meeting and we're watching the demo, and we're watching how in that system you have to go to the quality management application and create these quality checklist standards and then connect it to this and connect it to that just to get it to execute some type of calibration. And then the user experience was just ungodly. Click, 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 click. So I kind of stopped the demo and I said, look, we do thousands and thousands of calibrations at each site all year long. That is just way too much. And the people that don't have to use the system every day start laughing about the number of clicks. Like that was a joke, that's not really a thing or a user experience problem if the technician needs to click 20 times to execute something. And I was literally brand new to the company. I was so offended by that. I literally went ballistic in the room. I was like, you guys are out of your mind. You have no idea what that user experience is like. And you're not being very understanding of what that means in the field. I mean, if in order for you to type the W in Word, you had to then do 12 other things first and then hit W, you wouldn't be very happy at your word processing software. And that's the experience you're trying to give to people. Like that can't be, like, that's just crazy. So anyway, that was a long story for a good point.
Well, we like
those are real things.
It is. And a lot of people overlook that. So, this is not necessarily about the course, but when we look at CMMS in general and the selection process, how organizations do it, you're stuck with what they have, whatever, there has to be some empathy towards what the actual user experience is, because maintenance people as a whole, okay, we have different levels, right? We're a manager, we want to see KPIs and dashboards and all this cool stuff. Well, if I'm out there slinging wrenches, I want to do the work. I like doing really good work. I like coming through. I like getting home on time. And if I got to do 20 clicks to close out a work order, whether it's a mobile device or not, it just isn't going to happen because it's too disruptive, not just the time, but the distraction. And we have to stop and think about that. Whereas, again, I'm just generalizing here, but a CFO or somebody over here wants to see the numbers. They don't care about anything else. I understand that. And we just have to find ways to do better and make that assessment earlier, so that I always bring it back to the frontline workforce. Whoever's going to use it, that CMMS administrator, the people that are going to close out their work orders, so on. get it in their hands. You've given great examples in the past where, hey, if you're doing a demo on a CMMS platform, have them show you how they entered that. Don't just use dummy data and do some quick clicks and give me a 20-minute demo and expect me to spend, whatever, 10,000, 100,000, 1.2 million, get in there and do that. So I think for everybody that has that opportunity to attend this course, whether it be at the campus or online, I think it's really good. I'm really excited to hear more about it in the future. I think we're going to continue these conversations. One last thing to close out, George. I always want people to have an opportunity to get in touch with you. And obviously they can go to reliabilityx.com and learn everything about what ReliabilityX does. They can connect with you on LinkedIn, George Williams. Really easy to get you there. Are there any other ways you prefer people get in touch with you, look into the course, anything at all?
Well, to look into the course, you can go to University of Wisconsin's interdisciplinary professional program. There's a link there to click on certifications, and then within certifications, you'll see maintenance and reliability management, and there's a bunch of courses there, not just this one. And they're all really phenomenal. You need 5 courses to get your certificate. There's I'm going to guess roughly a dozen that you can take, but you need 5 of them to get their certificate. So there's a lot more courses than just the minimal requirement. In addition to that, you can always shoot an email at ask@reliabilityx.com for any questions you may have. We certainly get back to you. It may not be that day, but we certainly get back to you. And you can always give us a ring at 877-RLBL-TYX.
Awesome. We'll make sure we'll put that visual up for people to reference that are watching. People will hear it when they're listening. George, again, as always, it's a pleasure to speak with you. I appreciate the insights. And, for everybody out there, check out this course. A course on CMMS setup and utilization is nothing but upside, in my opinion.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Greg. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
You got it. I appreciate it, George. Did you find this episode helpful? Please send us some feedback, suggest a topic, or ask a question. Reach out to CMMS Radio if you need a co-pilot on your CMMS project. Visit CMMSradio.com and use the What's on Your Mind link. Thank you for tuning in to CMMS Radio, your resource for all things CMMS, from selection to implementation, to help you make better choices, learn from industry experts, and have a successful CMMS journey.